So the reason why I am excited to have this conversation with you is because when I came to Korea in September, I was looking to learn from people that were, let's say, 10, 20 years ahead of me, very developed careers. And that is true. And I have had many of those conversations, which has been awesome. But I was also hoping to find young people that maybe think differently, are working on cool, like ambitious projects. And maybe it was a few weeks ago, you had stumbled on the Cambridge website, and I found your personal website through that. And you were working on a bunch of different extracurricular activities, and it was just a pretty cool medium of self-expression. And then when we had the chat, maybe was it last week? Yeah. Just learning about your background was quite fascinating. So I'm grateful that you were willing to have the conversation. But could you share a little bit about who you are and also your upbringing? Because I find your international exposure pretty cool as well.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I came wearing my Sunday best, basically. I'm not used to this format as well. I'm just, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
To talk about my upbringing, I guess I would have a very nomadic upbringing. I left Korea when I was 2, and then I went to the States. I went to Chicago for a few years. I think we shared that.
You were in the suburbs, right?
Yes, I was in the suburbs. I actually was in the neighborhood where they filmed the Home Alone films and the Breakfast Club. So it was John Hughes' neighborhood. Yeah. So I didn't know that lore when I was there, but then apparently that's where it was.
Wow.
So I grew up there for around 4 or 5 years. This was back when I barely had object permanence. So I don't think I have that many memories of my time there, but I did my preschool there. And when I was starting primary school, I actually went to Colombia in South America, in Bogota. And I stayed there for around 4 or 5 years, I would say.
Wow.
So that's where I got my first formal education, I would say. That's when Spanish was basically my first official language, I would say.
And how old were you when you moved to Colombia, roughly speaking?
I think 6, maybe 6.
Wow.
6 years old,
Wow.
I think.
Wow.
Yeah, 6, 7, maybe perhaps.
Okay.
So I stayed there for around 4 or 5 years, and that's where I, grew up. And after that, I went back to the States for 1 more year for primaries, for my 5th grade or 6th grade. And then I actually went to China, to Weihai specifically. It's a city in the Shandong province. And then after 2 years there, I then went to another city called Qingdao. That's another city in the Shandong province. So I stayed in China for around 5-6 years, I would say. Yes. So just been moving way too much, I would say. Yeah. I was even supposed to go to college in Hong Kong. Everything was set up for me to go there. But I applied at a certain stage of Hong Kong's history, I'd say during the umbrella protest and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was I don't think it was deemed safe enough for me to go then. So I decided to come to school here in Korea. I think it was the most financially prudent decision, I guess. But that's the rough timeline of my time here. So I've been in Korea since, I guess, 2019.
2019. Yes. And how about throughout your upbringing, as you were kind of bouncing around different countries? Did you also take trips back to Korea, and did you have family here?
I do remember that maybe around during that period when I was starting to maybe perhaps move to China. I do remember that we did come here a little bit, to visit my family for the first time in a long time. I remember I didn't know anyone in my extended family. I remember being very perplexed when I was when I met my grandma basically for the first time, or my uncles for the first time and aunts for the first time. And I could barely speak Korean. I had a lot of trouble. Basically, I remember this one memory where I just got off the car, and then we were walking to the apartment, but then suddenly the elevator burst open. My grandma just came running towards me and grabbing me, and I was like, who is this lady? Help me. But safe enough, it was my grandma. Yeah. But then I had not many prior experiences in Korea, so it was a little bit surprising and shocking for me to come here. But then but after that, maybe sometimes I would come back and forth, especially because Qingdao and Weihai are relatively quite close to, I think they're the closest cities to Korea. So during that period of time, I did come back and forth, and I think it was those momentary times in Korea that made me become a little bit more accustomed, I would say. But yeah, it took a while. I think most exposure to Korean culture I think I had was those weekend Korean schools, basically, like the local church or something. Yeah, basically, yeah. But apart from that, not much exposure, I would say.
And are you open to sharing, like, in terms of the reasons why you moved from Korea to the States, from the States to Bogota,
right.
From Colombia to China, etc.?
Right.
Was there a deliberate effort to have like some sort of multicultural background from your parents, or what was the reason why?
I don't know if it was because of some sort of like agenda to like make me a multicultural person. I think it was mostly just because my dad's business. He had offices set up in Colombia as well as in the States and such. I don't know the details of the calculus in his mind of like what drove him to like open up those offices there, but I think it was mostly just because my dad's business. I see. People always ask me, it's either you are a missionary or either you are a businessman or either you're a diplomat. But then my dad was just a businessman, I would say. Yeah.
And in terms of what you're doing right now, so technically you are still a university student.
Yes. I am. Yes.
And you are at Yonsei, right? The studies that you are undertaking right now, I guess, can you share a little bit about what you're studying?
Right. My main major is international studies, but I'm also doing a sort of double in AI, something called AI concentration. But this is a recent pivot in terms academically. I'm technically a junior at Yonsei right now. I think my age really tells it, but then I've been pushing my graduation for some time now, mostly because of the military service, but also because during COVID, I thought that, hey, COVID is going to end pretty soon. I want to experience college life as it was meant to be. I miscalculated, so I did like internships and like I try to get as much work experience I think as possible during that remote era. But yes, I think maybe that added like three years to my school life. But like considering like other people, my peers and such, apparently it's a very normal track here in Korea.
Yes.
To take a few. I think the term is called gap years or something, and then internships. And I have a lot of people who are in the same track as me, so a lot of people do delay their graduation. I think it's something that maybe not as common in the States.
Right.
You graduate as early as possible, 21, 22 or something. But then, yeah, I'm turning 25 this year, I would say. Yeah.
So what do you think of that whole structure, like in Korea? Do you think it works? Is it good? Like for me, it seems just having had the professional experiences that I've had, because I'm 28 right now, and it's been maybe 6-7 years of like real professional experience. It seems like the trade-off of just I guess the military service stuff is a whole different equation. It just seems massive. And I know you have a very unique kind of military service experience, which I'd love to ask you more about as well. But in terms of the fact that most guys kind of graduate school a little bit later, do you think it's a good thing? Is it a problematic in some ways from a social perspective, or like what has your experience been?
This is going to be a boring answer, but I think it's definitely just case by case. I think it really depends on how you spend that time. Do you spend that time trying to go for internships, going for exciting projects, or are you just going around I think traveling in of itself is also something that's not a waste of time, I think it really just depends on how you spent that time. I would say because of COVID, my options were very, very, very limited. I could only do like remote things. I couldn't go to like offices, or I can go to like in-person things that much. So all I had to do was basically wake up at like 8:59 to check in for classes or for like work at 9 a.m. and basically it was nice not showering. Oh wait, maybe I should do that. Basically just going straight into work or like a project or anything like that. But I definitely think it just depends on the time. I think pre-COVID or post-COVID, I think I think it just depends on the projects and the portfolio that you take onto yourself. I definitely do think that there are people who I think it could be like an opportunity cost for some people, but I definitely know that there are people who can like, spend it productively. Yes. And
your own personal interest. So when I came across your website, debate has been a big part of your life, right?
Yes.
You're interested in like film and photography, right? As like a side hobby, right? You're interested in this AI stuff. I mean, you're studying that for school. You're also doing stuff for Perplexity here in Korea. Yes. Like the diversity of your interests is kind of what stuck out to me.
Right.
Can you share a little bit about like your own viewpoints on extracurriculars? Because that's something you're very passionate about, right?
I think in terms of I was talking about opportunity cost.
Yes.
It's funny because my high school teacher, he came to me one day and he told me, Joon, you remind me of this character named Max Fisher. And I don't know if you know the movie Rushmore. Rushmore is one of Wes Anderson's early films. And basically the whole story revolved around a prep school student named Max Fisher who didn't study. Basically, I think the quote was, he's the worst student we got because he doesn't study at all. But then he has just a bunch of extracurriculars. There's this montage in the film where he's like the editor-in-chief in the yearbook, and he's in the karate club, he's in the MUN club, he's in the debate club, in the cross club, in the choir, calligraphy club, all these different things. And he was just basically telling me, Joon, you got too many extracurriculars. Go study a little bit. I think that's basically a good representation of my life. I like collecting hobbies. I like collecting extracurriculars. I think the happiest I've ever been, and the only thing that makes, I think, no, maybe this sounds bad. It's not as bad as that. But then, what makes my college life worth it are the student clubs I'm part of, like the student circles I'm part of, and the activities that we do together. Debate is a big part. Shout out to Yonsei, Underwood Union, YU, and the Kita community, I would say as well. It just gives me a lot of opportunities to just talk to people and like travel with people. Yeah, I've just been loving debate so far. And in terms of personal extracurriculars, it's just I just enjoy it a lot. I just enjoy all these extracurriculars. I think I have too many, so it becomes a matter of like weighing which one I should prioritize.
Yeah.
But then, but yes, I guess that's my experience with extracurriculars.
What struck me is I think with a lot of people that try and like brand themselves as having a lot of diverse interests,
Right.
specifically as it relates to, let's say, like the college application process,
Right.
is people try to like oversell themselves in terms of what they've accomplished.
Right.
But I feel like with you, in terms of your own like personal accomplishments and your interests, like one is the interests are very genuine, right? It's like very authentic. It's like you have a deep curiosity in the subjects that you're pursuing, whereas other times it sounds like, oh yeah, I was a startup founder, but you didn't really do or build or like create anything. You just wanted that title so that you could go for a job application.
Right.
That's something that I see here a lot in Korea. And then it's also something that I see a lot in the States as well, is like these high school students that feel a ton of pressure to brand themselves as having a ton of extracurriculars.
Right.
But your situation, I think, was quite unique in that you had a very like genuine interest and like a deep curiosity. And has it always been that way for you since you were young?
I'm gonna be honest. I think I also went down that track for a while. I think there was a point of my time, especially in high school, I called myself a founder and CEO when it was like literally nothing. I think there is this urgency to maybe like label yourself something with some sort of like title of superiority. I think there's always that urgency. But then I realized as time went by, I just realized that was all just a farce. I actually hate calling myself a CEO or founder. I have a bunch of projects I'm working on that give off like the hint of a startup or anything like that. But I don't think, maybe it's my imposter syndrome, but I definitely don't think that I deserve calling myself a founder or CEO. I think I don't deserve that yet. I think I need to reach certain milestones to be worth calling myself that, I would say. And in terms of like portfolios and resumes and stuff, I didn't know the concept of like branding or anything like that. I think back then, I think mostly for me, you mentioned the site and the site that I created. I actually built the site that's active right now during the army. This was back when so I think this is just an entire different like chapter of my life, I would say.
Yep.
But I went to the 89th. I went to 12사단 89 포병대대. Basically, I went to the 89th Artillery Battalion. It's very close to it's pretty close to the DMZ, I would say. I think a lot of people who have like third culture backgrounds, I think they are pre-inclined to maybe go to the Air Force or to, if they're lucky enough to go to Katusa, like, which is a US Army track, and it's relatively easier lifestyles, I would say, there, because they're much more academically inclined and such. But I was stupid. I wanted to get it over with, So I said, you know what? I'll just 일반 전형. I'll just get it over with. But they sent me to the worst possible base possible. They just sent me to the tough base, and I think I was the only person with like an international background there. Basically, everyone else had been like just comes from like every like all aspects of Korea, but that are not like anything abroad. But I was in that specific base, but I felt extremely lonely. I felt this sense of urgency, I guess, that I had to build something.
Yeah.
I kept seeing, you get your phone for maybe 2 hours a day or something. And then I just scroll around and I see other people's projects and portfolios and such. And I feel like this need to build something. And I also thought that it was a good chance for me to perhaps, learn new skill like web development and such. So I got permission. I was the first person in my entire division to get permission to bring an iPad into. I had to fill out so much paperwork for this.
And so when you were saying the reason why you got assigned to that like camp or that group is because you wanted to get your military service done more quickly, whereas if you had been more patient and kind of taken a different process, you could have had a much easier situation in terms of military service? Or what was the reason why you got sent to that one?
I think impatience was definitely one part of it, for sure. I think the other part of it was, I guess, this sort of pressure, like from perhaps my parents and like from people around me, I guess, who told me that, if you want to go to the army, you have to go. It's like, I think there's this macho-esque sort of like narrative being that if you want to go to the army, just actually you have to go to the actual army. Like, what is a genuine army experience and such? So I guess there's also that sort of like pressure in me to perhaps go for the toughest route, or maybe not the toughest route, but go for like a normal route, just so that there's no like any like
regrets,
excuse, any excuse that I took a shortcut or anything like that. Perhaps also in my mind was the thought that it'd be nice to have like an authentic Korean experience. I think the international school experience in Korea, it's genuinely a bubble. I think people who are third culture kids, they always hang out with each other. I think in Yonsei you see that as well. People who speak English, people who lived abroad, they always hang out with each other and such. And then I wanted to, I guess, experience what it was like, just like hanging out with normal Korean people and such. People who would never like. So I met so many interesting people in the army, I would say. So perhaps that was also one of the reasons that I decided to just go for the normal track.
So you came back to Korea, was it 2019 for school?
2019, yes.
And then you did like a few years of undergrad before you did military service?
Yes. I did my freshman year and my sophomore year, I would say. Sophomore year during COVID. And then after that, in 2022, July, I went to the army. Yes.
And in terms of like Korean language proficiency, your familiarity with like just like Korean culture and living here, did it feel like a little bit foreign, or you had I guess like taken trips while you were living in China? Like how was that overall experience for you?
It was a genuine foreign experience. I think I had conversational Korean. I think I could speak Korean to a certain extent. But again, as I mentioned, it was. I lived, even in Korea, I lived inside a bubble where it was mostly international school kids. The people I interacted with were people who, do English debate in Korea. And I didn't hang out with a lot of like local Korean people that much. But then when I went to the army, I think it was just that first genuine experience where I met people who lived in Qingdao. I met people who had never been abroad before, people who had never met a foreigner before. I think people, especially people with my background, don't really appreciate just how secluded Korea can be as well. And it was just that experience. I also came in with no real specialized knowledge of like Korean army. Apparently there are lots of things that are common knowledge, common sense in the army when you go in, but I had none of that because I think I should have like maybe asked more, but I came in completely blind. For example, there's something called a galgari in it's like a sort of wetpea, like it's sort of like a black outerwear that you wear. No, not black outerwear. It's like a camouflaged outerwear that you wear beneath one of your winter jackets and such. When I was introduced, when I was sent to my jade, people, my seniors told me, "Oh, this is something you wear when you're cold." And I just took that took that at face value. And then I was like, okay, sure, I'll wear that when I'm cold. And my calculus was, okay, I'm cold, I'm gonna wear it. The thing is, I didn't know this, but there's this entire understanding in Korea that you only wear the kalkari, when you are when you are a certain rank, when you have certain when you are a certain when you've got enough jam, basically. And this here, a person who's just zero experience at all, just wearing a kalkari around the base, that got me so many side eyes from so many people. The next morning, they just called me out, basically stood me up, basically grinded me for a few hours, basically, about that. So yeah, I came in completely without any knowledge. I didn't know a lot of the administrative words as well. There's like technical words. I thankfully I was assigned to a clerk position, to a desk position. But then I didn't know like how the paperwork work. I never used Hancom before. So there's just a lot of things I had to like rush learning, because I think the army is a good high pressure environment for you to get integrated in the Korean culture as quickly as possible. You have no other choice but to. So you're basically in survival mode there. But yeah, it was a very unique experience. Yeah.
And did you come across other people like yourself at all when you were in the army, or not really?
I think there was one person, but he was in a different unit, so we barely like talked that much. Perhaps in the hallway we would say hi, and it was like that one respite of like me speaking Korean 99.9% of the time, and like speaking in like Tanaka, like in the Korean expressions, Korean ways. But then it was like that one respite, that 1 second respite when we see each other, we glance each other in the hallway. It's like, hi. And it's like that one English word. It's like, it felt like a breath of fresh air, basically, for me. But no, there was basically no one with my background, I think.
Wow.
In my entire background, yeah.
And it seems like even in terms of planning and academic studies, that like choosing when to do military service could be quite disruptive. Like even with like your own friend groups or what social clubs you're in. Like how did you think through that? Is it fairly common to do the 2 years and then go? Or some people, they do the entirety of their studies and then they go afterwards, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, for example, right after high school, they go. Some people, they go right after freshman year. I think the most common track is to go right after your freshman year. The reason why you do that is because it's common, you want to ensure that when you come back from the army, that you're still hanging out with people, with your peers and such, so that you don't like fall behind and such. I wanted to wait out COVID. So for me, it was more of like a prisoner's dilemma-esque sort of like, hey, when should I go? Should I wait out COVID or not? I think it really just depends on like the opportunities that are lined up for you, and whether or not you really prioritize hanging out with peers and such. Because in Korea, age really does matter. It also, for example, matters in the sense that if you don't time it properly, there's a chance that when you go to the army, you are actually hanging out with people who are younger than you, and you have to use 존댓말 and Tanaka to people who are younger than you. And I didn't mind that much. But for people who are Korean, that's it sort of hurts your ego a little bit. You having to like, there's this kid who's like 3 years younger than you, but you like use 존댓말 to him, you use Tanaka to him. So there is that as well. So there's lots of different factors. I think it just depends on how much you weigh one thing and the other. For me, it was just like, I want to wait out COVID. I had some opportunities lined up. I want to try to focus on this a little bit more. But for sure, I because I pushed it, I was using Tanaka to people who were way younger than me. Yeah.
And it was how long in terms of like length of time? It was 18 months?
18 months, yes. From 2022 July to 2024 January.
And in terms of what like a typical day looked like for you and how much free time you had to like pursue your own intellectual curiosities. Like you mentioned, you got access to the iPad, right? And could use that. Could you tell me a little bit about like what the average day looked like and how painful it was to endure some of it, or whether or not it was enjoyable?
I'm going to try to see if I can remember this. Okay, this is like a year ago, I would say, like last time, like more than a year ago, I would say. I think you wake up at 6:30 a.m. and then you're supposed to go outside into 아침 제조, and like you're supposed to do like this routine outside in the yard. You're supposed to do morning exercise as well. Then you get breakfast. Then you wash up and everything, and then you start your day at like around, I think, 8:30 to 9ish. At that time, you have to go immediately start your work day. For me, I was a clerk, so most of that would involve like some daily reports, like daily like memos you have to send out. You have to ensure that everything. I did a lot of inventory management. I had to ensure that everyone had the right equipment and everything like that, supply management and such. It depends on, like, for example, if you have like training or drill days, that's when it can get like pretty intense. For example, those days, sometimes like 3 to 4 days without showering and such. You have to stay outside, and Gangwon-do is super, super, super cold. So cold. Yeah. So when there are those drill days and training days, the schedule can get pretty messed up and such. But most of the days would be paperwork, supply stuff, moving boxes and ensuring that everyone has everything. And then, you get lunch after that. And then you continue work until like around 5:30, I would say. At 5:30, you get your phone. That is a magical moment in your day, right? The phone is basically like an instrument of your agency, basically, that limited access to agency, limited access to the outside world, I would say. You get your phone, you eat dinner while looking at your phone, while trying to catch up with people and such. Before the phones came out, it's very interesting, the psychological effect that phones had, in the sense that before phones, people had to find their own entertainment, in the sense that you had to find it either by reading books, watching TV, or grinding other people, like using your sense of superiority to basically make your own entertainments, getting people to dance or something like that. But phones have had like a macro psychological effect on how people like behave themselves, or like behave in the army during their free time. These days, just people are on their bunk beds, on their like basically their beds, just looking at their phones, just watching dramas and such. Yeah, it's that one moment that you kind of have time for yourself and such. So I think because of phones, you just have this drastic decrease in people like bullying each other and stuff. It's not like that bullying does not exist anymore. Yep. But it was sort of an interesting change.
So when you were doing military service, was that phone like a rule? Was that instituted while you were there, or it had happened?
It happened like a few years before I had come in.
I see.
Thankfully, yes. I did not know that you should bring your phone to the boot camp. So I had actually left it at home the day I had gone to the boot camp. That was a struggle in itself. So I had to like mail it back. In those few days when I didn't have my phone, that was a struggle because there was nothing else to do. But yeah, so you get your phone at 5:30, you get dinner and such. You try to do anything you can within those 3 hours. Those 3 hours are precious, right? And at 8:30, you give your phone back and you start cleaning. You clean the base, your whole unit area every single night. And at 9:30ish, you do 저녁 점호, and then basically they do like a health check, where they do like a 인원 check basically, and see if there's any issues and such. And then at 10 p.m. you officially go to sleep. But there's also something called you can basically ask for extra time to study or anything like that. And what I did every night was basically to go to the sajibang. Sajibang is a cyber like 지식 정보방, basically the place where you can like access the computer and such. And in the beginning stages, before I had the iPad, I could only get the iPad like a year into my service, basically, because I need to get permission, paperwork, and everything like that. But before that, I could only use these really, really, really bad old computers that they had in the computer hall. And basically, I ran some sort of really old Linux. I'm not sure. I don't know what they ran. It was really bad. Basically, I was trying to find ways I could like remote connect to my home computer and such. So I had to find lots of different shortcuts and ways to like try web dev or try software development or like build stuff out in the army. It was genuinely a struggle during the army, but I tried to make do with the tools that I had during that time.
The one story that I think is worth highlighting here that you had shared with me last time we spoke is the 1517 fund, right? One of the GPs was like previously the founder of the Teal Fellowship.
The two GPs were the co-founders of the Teal Fellowship.
And you received some sort of a grant, right? While you were in military service, right? Could you just share a little bit about that? Because I thought that was fascinating.
That was interesting. So I've been in touch with the 1517 fund since 2017. Actually, I applied when I was a high schooler, and I didn't know anything. I don't know, through some algorithmic lottery I had happened upon their website, and I had applied to just do a discussion with them. But apparently I was the first Korean student to get in touch with them and such. But this was during this early in my life. I didn't have that many projects to speak of and such. But while in the army, again, it was that sense of urgency to try and do as many projects as possible. I sent out a loom, and 1517 they were one of the first earliest back. I think they were one of the first investors in loom, I think. And the whole concept was you have to send a 5-minute loom to the 1517 fund.
And for those listening, loom is just a recorded video of yourself.
Yeah, exactly, right? A screen recording, basically. Problem is, again, I had just an iPad. I could only access the mobile versions of Figma and like Framer. It was such a struggle building everything out. Even building out a PPT was such a struggle and such. I had to do everything through the mobile versions of everything. So what I did was I asked for furlough. I registered for furlough to go to a local cafe. And you're not supposed to go out by yourself and such, because they're Gangwon-do, specifically that area, Inje. They have military police walking around everywhere and such. You're supposed to always have someone right next to you. But I just went to a local cafe, had my iPad, recorded that loom like 10, 15 times, because there was always a problem with mobile. It was such a struggle. But then I sent that out in my army uniform and everything like that. And Danielle Strackman, who was the general partner at 1517, she came back and she told me, let's have a discussion, let's have a call. That also introduced a new problem, because where do you have a call in the army, especially during your service and such? So I had to, again, plead with my captain, begging him, this is a big deal. He doesn't know what the TL fellowship or any of this stuff is. Yeah. There's just this kid who is just arrogant. He just wants to talk to some foreign people and such. So I got permission from him to, apparently I couldn't do the call in base, because that would be like there would be a security issue, and then it would also disrupt people. People would be wondering, why is this kid, talking to people and such. So I had to bring my iPad and everything to the Wibyongso. Wibyongso is like the front gate, and there's like a visitor center that no one uses. It's like completely secluded. There's all the windows are open. This is like in the peak of winter, super cold. It's like minus. Really, it was really, really cold. There's no heating system at all and such. So I was like shivering in the visitor center by myself. And you don't have any Wi-Fi or anything like that as well, because Wi-Fi introduces security problems as well. So I had to go and try to turn on my data on my iPad. I had to figure out a way to do that. I was like, how do you do this and such? But in the end, I was able to get the Zoom to work. I had a chat with Miss Strackman, and she was so kind. She was so generous, and she was kind enough to offer me a grant, a Medici grant, I think the name is. It was. I think I was the first native Korean, local Korean, to receive the grant. Wow! But it was exciting. I think it was genuinely a really inspiring moment in my life, because it's this is during the army. I felt completely alone. I felt completely behind everything. Yeah. But it was that one token of trust coming from a person like Miss Strackman, and then that drove me for quite a few months.
That's such a cool story. Such a struggle. In terms of that grant, is it more so you're already working on cool stuff, right, and here's some money to fuel your own curiosities,
right,
or was it a specific proposal about what you'd be using those funds to work on a specific project for?
Probably the first.
Okay.
I think it was me introducing it. You definitely have to pitch a project that you're doing. It's not like a pitch of yourself, but obviously your background also matters and such. But basically it was me pitching a project called Dongari. Dongari is a Korean War for Student club, basically. And what we're trying to create is, even right now, even though we've pivoted the mission a little bit, I guess it's. Are you familiar with Luma?
Yes.
Luma, the event platform. Basically, it's creating a Luma, but for student extracurriculars, and it ties back to my love of hobbies and extracurriculars and such. For me, we're trying to solve the issue of, I think, discovery of extracurriculars and student extracurriculars just in general. The infrastructure is just fragmented everywhere. It's Facebook groups, it's on Google Sheets. And what happens is that because all this information is siloed, a lot of people aren't able to access equitable information about extracurricular education or events, or like opportunities are available to them locally. And you miss out on all these opportunities because the infrastructure is just incredibly bad.
Yes.
For example, ICEF, which is one of the world's largest science fairs in the world. If you ask a normal local student here in Korea, they would never know what ICEF is, because it's only the international schools, only like the privileged school students who have access to these knowledge bases, because the school has some sort of pre-existing, system set and forth where they actively look through bulletin boards and such. But then all these extracurricular opportunities are based upon these, access to these are based on these arbitrary standards. And what we're trying to do is like create like a centralized approach, try and like ensure that people have much more of an equitable access to this information and such. But yeah, that was what Dongari is and such, and then we're trying to like build that up a little bit more.
So you're working on this with a few of your Yonsei colleagues?
Yes. Building that out, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
I know.
Well, it makes sense, because even with my efforts with Cambridge, is like there are a bunch of different communities, like English-speaking communities in Korea, and many of these communities serve different purposes and have different agendas. But for somebody who comes to Seoul for the first time and doesn't know that much about what's happening here, the information is, it's all over the place. And so it could take you like 6 months just to learn about some communities that exist. And so even with Cambridge, I've been thinking about, can I centralize like different communities that already exist in some way? So it makes a lot of sense of what you're trying to do.
If you think about it, the natural approach right now is for you to do all the browsing yourself. I know that there are AI tools that can like help out with this a little bit, but then even those are dependent on whether that site has modern meta tags, whether or not, like for example, a certain like database is updated or not. So again, it takes a lot of time for you to get familiar with the infrastructure to find opportunities and events and such. But if you really think about it, this could all just be solved with just a simple list up. Like you just being able to, for example, aggregate this information to a very, very simple web list and such. And then that listing would give you much more of a much more easier time to try and navigate what sort of events, what sort of opportunities you should take on. And this is especially important for students, like high school students or college students, who are trying to find ways to excel, trying to find ways to participate as much as possible. But I don't know how a student is expected to excel when they don't know what they could excel in. They don't know what events, what opportunities they could go to. So it's a very unfair advantage for people with pre-existing connections or pre-existing infrastructure. But yeah, that's what we're trying to hopefully try to solve.
That makes sense. And when I was looking at the just some information about Dongari on your website. So I saw you had kind of described it here as potentially like a Luma type of service, right? But on your site, there was also it almost looked like a circle community or like a Mighty Networks thing, or almost like a more customizable Slack channel that had more integrations for like extracurricular types of clubs and communities. Is it one or the other, or is you're still kind of just trying to figure out what the ideal model is?
So I started off with, as you mentioned, like sort of a Slack-esque type of thing. Again, I've been working on this specific project of Dongari for like a few years. It was the first thing I pitched to the 15-17 fund when I was in 2017, because I struggled still at that time with that same problem. So many different extracurricular opportunities. It's all just based on chance. This is a problem. But obviously I didn't have that much technical knowledge then. I think as I grew a little bit more, and my awareness and experience with technical tools increased, so did in proportion, so did the complexity and simplicity of the project itself. In 2021, when I was pivoting again, I tried to create this super app of all these different tools. Oh, it's gonna be a Slack and a Discord and it's gonna be a Sana for all student extracurriculars. It's gonna be great. But then I'm looking back now and I'm thinking, okay, one, it's too technically advanced. You're just trying to be too many things at once.
Yes.
Secondly, there's issues about monetization. How are you going to monetize that?
Right.
So I think as I grew with my technical experience a little bit more, I would say, not that I'm an expert. I think I realized that there are 3 problems when it comes to EdTech specifically. One is product. Second is scaling, growth, and third is monetization. Product would be, students are very lazy. Students are very accustomed to the tools that they have. They want something that's more user friendly. They want something that's as lightweight and simple as possible. They even hate downloading new apps, or creating new accounts. So even a frictionless approach is really, really important for students in the product side. Secondly, on growth and scaling, EdTech doesn't really have like a natural network effect like something like Facebook does. EdTech, you're not, for example, incentivized or like in any way benefited just because another person starts onboarding into that specific tool. So there's no natural network effect. So it's very hard to grow a EdTech product. But thirdly, monetization. Students are not going to pay things. Students are very price sensitive.
Yep.
So it's very hard to build a SaaS around EdTech and such. So for us, it's like navigating those three different problems. Through Dongari, we're trying to create for product a frictionless approach, a really, really simple, lightweight approach where you don't even have to authenticate your account to even use these services and such. Secondly, on scaling and growth, we're hoping that we can like grow not via schools or campuses and such, but via extracurricular communities, via for example, ensuring that everyone, for example, in debate clubs, a club in Yonsei, just a normal club in Yonsei, might not feel incentivized to create an account just because another Yonsei club creates an account and such. But they might feel, for example, a consulting club might feel incentivized to create an account if an NUS or like a Harvard or Yale club creates an account and such. So we think that there's like a network effect when it comes to extracurricular categories and such. So I think that's like an avenue we're trying to explore. Obviously, these are all hypotheses and such. And like thirdly, on monetization, how do we ensure that it's a free service? Because we don't want to paywall it. Because the whole point of it is that we don't want to like create advantages to people who can afford things and not. What is a way we can like do this? And maybe recruiting is a way for you to do this, to ensure that there's a connection between recruiters and students directly and such. So these are three different problems that we're trying to explore and navigate through. But it's very exciting. We have like a different hypotheses that we're trying to test out and such. So that's all this exploration that we're doing on this specific field, I would say.
And the overarching hypothesis or mission or kind of gap that exists right now is like if you're a high school student or you're like an early college student, because this infrastructure doesn't exist, it just takes a long time for you to learn that these communities, these extracurricular groups that are like gathering, that they exist, and because of that, they're not able to maybe find new passions that would like really spark their curiosity.
Exactly.
That's the idea.
Yeah, so all this knowledge is siloed on these specific tracks. You need to know exactly what Facebook group to be in. You need to know exactly what Slack community to be in to be able to access that information and such. So I just think that's a little bit unfair.
Especially as somebody like if you go down the, let's say, medical career path or law or like finance and banking, right, is like oftentimes people are kind of very zoned in on those career tracks, right? But for somebody like you, or even for somebody like me, like I like having conversations with people of all different age groups, hence we're having this conversation right now, and people that have very different interest areas, right? And so whenever I try and find resources that can like fuel those types of interests, it's just very, very tricky. And so I personally feel like multidisciplinary learning is like the future and the way to go. And so this makes a lot of sense. So I'm rooting for you and your team in the process.
Hopefully we figure it out. I don't claim to like, I'm not going to be like a person who says like we figured it out. This is a groundbreaking, world-breaking solution and stuff. No, we just have to test it out. I would say we just need to see if people are willing to share their experiences a lot more. If people are, if even the market or like students are ready for something like this, I'm just very excited. To just test it out. Experiment it.
Aside from the your websites and kind of browsing it, and it's just coming off as like really cool passion project that you've been working on. I had asked you before of like I don't come across that many and. Again, my sample size is quite limited, but in terms of like your curiosities and the diversity of them and just the like point of view that you come from is like, it's not you were born and raised in Korea and speak English. And you had kind of mentioned that Korea in many respects is kind of like a bubble, right? And I see that a lot. When I asked you about like why your different like worldviews or your interests are so diverse, you had pointed to like the influence that debates had on your life, right? So can you tell me a little bit about like debates, how long you've been doing it? And you were telling me about the specific type of structure, like parliamentary debate. I'd love for you to explain that as well.
So in high school, I did a lot of like, it's called forensics. I did a lot of public forum debate, and I did a lot of Model UN. Even during that period of time, it was a lot of research basis, like where you had to do research. But then what differentiates, for example, a topic format of forensics like public forum and MUN with the format that I'm doing right now, parliamentary debate, is that it's very targeted. So you get a specific topic and you research that topic in depth and such. So everything is prearranged and everything. So parliamentary debate is different, being that there is a variable of unpredictability to when you enter the debate competition or anything. For example, the way the format works is you enter the round and you get a topic, a theme, or anything. It can be about anything. It can be about, European finance. It can be about introspective feminism. It can be about like Filipino politics or anything like that. It can be about anything. It can be about K-pop. So you go into the round without knowing what the theme or the topic is, but you only get 15 minutes to prepare a 7-minute, 30-second speech. And these days, if you look at the meta of debate, so if you compare it to, for example, 1994, like when they had it at Oxford and such, the meta has really, really changed. So back then it was like Oxford, like Australian or American debaters, basically they spoke only a few sentences per minute. But these days the meta has changed to something called spreading, where you spread as much information as possible during that 1 minute and such. You do this, but you have to do this extremely analytically. You have to do this via structure and everything. So you come into the debate without knowing what the topic is, but because you know that you need to do everything based upon a structure, and there are still like benchmarks that you need to fulfill when it comes to like logical fulfilling the logic of a full soundness of an argument. You need to have pre-existing knowledge about such a variety of topics. So there's this habit called matter filing in debate, where you try and basically you create like Google Docs basically, and you just pour out all this information that you can get about as many topics as possible. I think the representative file is a file that's been spreading around in the debate community called the Ryan Lafferty matter file. I think is a student in Dartmouth, I'm not sure, but he created a World Championships matter file. And basically in that file, it's like a few hundred pages long, and basically just outlines all these stock arguments that you can have on such a variety of topics, on sanctions, on tariffs, on metaphysics, on ethics, on so many different aspects. But you come in, maybe perhaps some people try to memorize as many stock arguments as possible, but you realize you just need to just expand your knowledge so much that you need to be able to at least have a grasp or knowledge of so many different topics before you go into the competition. But you also need to find logical links between different things, because you realize that at many points the best habit you can get is basically to copy and paste the best arguments you found maybe online and such. You listen to some great debaters like Bosa or Ishamu or someone, and then you basically try and copy and paste that logic or that framework into different topics, because you realize that in a way, even though it's so unpredictable, there are certain like arguments that can be applied to different contexts depending on how you package it, depending on how you, for example, engage with another person's argument. So it just requires a ton of pre-existing knowledge, but also an ability for you to link that logic to any context as well. Yeah, so that's what I think differentiates people. And I speak as if I'm some sort of expert. I'm not. I think I'm okay in Northeast Asia, but in terms of Southeast Asia, I'm doing an exchange at NUS right now, at Singapore right now. Yeah. The Singaporean debaters are insane. They're like number 1 and 2 in Asia, basically. But yeah, that's what I've sort of gotten from the observations that I've seen from the circuit so far.
So the topics are literally, it can be anything, any type of topic. Yeah. There's no
limit.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so then, like in terms of the preparation process, Like, I don't understand. You just read whatever you want. It's more about like abstract structure than it is like, because you can't really study for anything because you just have no idea what's going to come.
So you can study in the way that you can structure your speech. You start with definitions. You start with, like, for example, setting up what the context of the debate is and such. And you get as you get more experience, you get certain habits as to how you structure the debate, how you contextualize and frame the debate in a way that's advantageous to your side, perhaps, and such. And then you, for example, start after that. You do the preambles, basically. You go into constructives, and then you go on to perhaps like engagements and like weighing about like which side. The best habit to have in debate is to be charitable to the other side, whereby you do something called biting the bullet, whereby you take the best of the other side's argument. You take the truth of the argument at face value, and then what you do is, even if this is true, why does our argument weigh over this argument and such? That could be different that could be through different benchmarks, whether that be through net impact, like this has much more of an impact on a wider group of stakeholders, or you can talk about you can do a minority argument whereby it affects a particular minority, or you can just bring about, for example, why the probability of something is greater on your side in something. So there are different ways for you to weigh out a person's argument while still being charitable, while understanding, not just like refuting the argument, not like, for example, making an assertion, but just ensuring that there is a claim to logic from the other side, but why do you still outweigh that? So it's very important. I think the best debaters are the most charitable, the most kind debaters, I would say.
Interesting. The whole that whole like sport or competition seems so intimidating to me.
It's intimidating to me.
And you started doing this in high school then? Was that
so
when
I started? I've been doing forensics since high school, but I got into parliamentary. I didn't know what parliamentary debate was. My school didn't have a parliamentary debate club. I didn't know what parliamentary debate competitions were, even though they are the norm. So it really just depends. Your access to extracurriculars and opportunities and stuff really just depends on what school you went to. These arbitrary factors. If I had known what parliamentary debate was, maybe I'd been much more invested in it. Maybe I could have started earlier and such, because there's all this education that you could have taken onto yourself and such. But I didn't know. I didn't know it existed. I went to school. I went to Yonsei, and that's when I first heard about parliamentary debate. And then my biggest regret is not doing parliamentary debate earlier. It's just such a great sport.
So you have this like debate passion and interest, right? And then you're also interested in like the AI, I guess like digital design as well. Extracurriculars. In terms of like from a career aspirational perspective, like you obviously have an interest in Silicon Valley as well. I guess has it changed over time since you were like a freshman, and then after you went to the military service, and since you've started like Dongari, are you still trying to figure that out, like in terms of what it is you want to do?
So when I first came to college, I was thinking of going to law, actually. I know I had done like these tech projects, and I was in 15-17 community since high school and such, but I was not into it because I wanted to go into Silicon Valley. Or I think a lot of people, and I think this is a mistake, a lot of people go into tech or into Silicon Valley because they want to pursue like a title or a label of like, oh, I want to become a CEO first. No, not for me. I just wanted to pursue that passion project of mine. And via that project, I slowly gained some technical like knowledge and such. But I went into college thinking I want to do law. I want to get into international law and such. But then during COVID and such, as I got more experience and did internships and such, first of all, I became disillusioned with international law and foreign policy and such. I realized that there is a limit to what you can do with writing and with academia and such. And I also realized that the environment in foreign policy isn't. For me, it's the fact that it's become such a norm in foreign policy that you need to host these in these like elaborate venues and such, and you have to, for example, be so polite about the way that you do your writing and such. It prevents a lot of, for example, actual tangible ideas, actionable ideas, and I think there's just a lot of pomp and elegance in foreign policy that like cuts into like the efficiency of of a lot of these organizations. So I became disillusioned with it. But also, secondly, I realized that, hey, I actually like the concept of software. Software is such a scalable thing. Software can touch so many people's lives and can have such an impact and such. And I obviously had that episode in my life where I was thinking, maybe I should go into consulting. Maybe I should go into, like, but then I tried out consulting projects and such, but then I realized a PPT is not that powerful. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I've tried out these Excel files, I've tried these PPTs, but they feel much more softer than I realized, in the sense that it does feel a little more assertive. It feels like I'm working with a lot more theory than I thought. But then I contrast that to software. So I keep moving the
No, you're okay.
I contrast that with software, and software is something that you can see. Software is something you can manipulate and actually track the for example, how many people are actually using and how much time and money is being saved via your software and such. So I thought it was much more trackable, much more tangible, and I also could see like the product roadmap a lot more, in the sense that, like, I love UI. I love, like, for example, like, I love the concept of like you being able to engineer something and host it and see it live on the website, live on the web and such. While in consulting, it's a theory about whether or not you can do something or not. It's a proposal at many times. It's like a white paper of like, this is what we hope to achieve.
Yes.
Yeah. But you're not entirely sure if you're gonna be able to achieve that and such. And so I just really like the aspect that I could, like, basically, I don't know, you can't touch software, but you can basically see the fruits of your labor.
Yes.
Much more tangibly, I would say.
Feedback loop with consulting is not great. And oftentimes, even if like the person that you're advising takes your advice, you don't always get to control the execution, right?
Yes.
And it might take like 5-10 years to see whether or not that advice was right.
Yeah.
So
that's not to say that Silicon Valley, or like, I say this as if I've been there. I haven't been in the States for a decade, for like more than a decade. It's not to say that it doesn't have its quirks, it doesn't have its like problems and such.
Yes.
But yeah, I do agree that there's much more predictability in the way that you work and the projects that you work in software, I would say, because you know exactly what you're supposed to execute. You know exactly what sort of like UI design you're supposed to, ideate and such. So there's a lot more visualization I see in tech and software projects.
The other thing that we had spoken about last time we chatted, and I was interested in, is when I talked to people in the startup ecosystem here, like something felt just like different from talking to people in the US about the startup ecosystem, right? And you had previously mentioned, like, in terms of Korea, it can feel like a bubble in some respects, and that's on many different cultural layers, right? And I think like the Silicon Valley like startup ecosystem is one of those like subsets. From a information access perspective, and just understanding how like people that are operating, born and raised in Korea, and are within the startup ecosystem here, the information that they get exposed to. Would you mind articulating kind of some of your viewpoints and observations since living here?
Right. First of all, I think the tech and VC ecosystem in Korea is still at nascent stages, I would say. You do see a lot of, like, for example, chapters opening up in Korea. 500 Global, Antler are starting up chapters here in Korea, and they're trying to bring in more of the Silicon Valley-esque sort of like norms here into Korea and such. And it's going to take some time for it to like properly foment infrastructurally, especially on the government level and such. I think the biggest problem for me is that there is like a translation layer that happens between the information that exists in the States and then the time it takes and the format it takes when it comes to Korea. In the sense that a lot of people in tech, or a lot of people who are trying to get into tech here, or like into VC perhaps, they get their information via translated, localized versions of the information that exists in the States and such. They don't, for example, because of that language barrier, they don't go actively on Twitter themselves and like, or look through the API docs, or like, for example, are immediately alerted to once a product launch happens. They wait, for example, for it to be localized, for it to come out in their newsletter or something, or for it to come out in neighbor blogs or something, and then that is when they, for example, get the first exposure to that information. And then what happens during that translation phase is sometimes what happens is that Koreans get, I think, stuck into this mentality whereby they assume that is the world, that Substack that they're reading, that Anderson Horowitz or that YC Substack that they're reading, that is the entire world, that is the entire environment. And then what happens is that in Korea, they're still in that stage where using buzzwords and like using all this like YC-esque language is something that's just so common here. And it can come off as a little bit pretentious sometimes, but then I think it's just a problem, the fact that the information that we get is very limited, and the way we access that information is very, very limited as well. And it becomes a problem because then you can't, for example, weigh how accurate a claim is in the Substack that you're reading, the newsletter you're reading and such. You can't really, for example, test the waters of like the actual, like, you know, what actual people's reactions are towards the technology and such. So there's that lag as well in terms of like actual adoption of like technology. But there's also, for example, that again, I keep using this term, but then it's siloed in the sense that a lot of people assume that is the single source of truth. Yeah. They don't look for information themselves. They don't try to do a critical analysis of their sources of information, right? So a lot of times when I hear about opinions, and and this can be applied to like any other sphere, whether they're like political or anything. I always wonder whether the person truly holds that opinion. Like, whether do you actually hold that opinion, or are you really just spouting that opinion because it is an opinion that is rewarded in your base,
right? Or
you want to be seen holding that opinion among the people, among your peers and such. Because maybe it's because of my background in debate and such, but I believe that a truly held opinion is a truly studied opinion, like an opinion that if you are going to defend opinion, if you have a strong opinion about something, I expect you to be able to defend that opinion, to be able to, like, for example, have a lived experience of that opinion, or to be able to, for example, like, explain and like have knowledge and like be read on that specific opinion, rather than you, for example, just copying and pasting what you read in a VC Substack and then just basically thinking that is the source of truth, that is the opinion to have. And such. So yeah, I think perhaps people need to be much more metaphysically aware of their sources of truth, their sources of information, and maybe not take something at like face value and such. Yeah.
The reason that these silos exist and can't be disrupted.
Right.
So like one obvious one seems like the language dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Like if everybody in Korea were fluent in English and were speaking it on a daily basis, they'd have access to all of this other information as well. But there also seems like some sort of social, psychological dimension to it as well, where let's say you, as somebody who speaks both Korean and English, right? You were to start your own Substack, all in Korean, and were to try and reach a Korean like youth kind of market or demographic, right? Would you be able to like kind of disrupt the silos that exist? There seems to be something more deep going on, where it's like once one person kind of monopolizes like a group of people, like it's very, very hard to escape that dynamic.
I don't feel like I would be qualified to write a Substack. I don't know. What I like to do, and I think a few of my friends might find this annoying. What I do is that I like to browse my own information and such. I like to read through the docs and such. And what I like to do is, instead of like adding my own opinions and like adding my own analysis onto it, what I like to do is just send the links to the people. For example, Claude recently announced their 3.7 sonnets and such. Hey guys, they announced this and such. I send the links. I think links are the most actionable things possible. And I think a lot of people don't have access to the primary sources of knowledge, to the primary sources of this news and such. And they only get what's packaged like from these newsletters and such, from these talking heads and such, I guess. And that is a problem, I think. People derive an opinion based upon a pre-existing opinion rather than, like looking at like the actual primary information and such. So I think, for example, when it even comes to advice or like coffee chats and such, I love coffee chats. I love talking to people. But in terms of actual, like, for example, like actual transfer of information, or we call it text transfer in debate sometimes, the most useful information that you get is just like the 5 minutes that maybe your mentor is willing enough to give you like access to, for example, his his links of newsletters and stuff, or like his link of like of different stuff. Like he gives you, for example, hey, this is like my favorite course, or this is my favorite book, or this is my favorite music. This is where I read most of my information from and such. It's these links that are most actionable. Like it's the most actionable advice you can get from people. So I love the small talk. I love getting to know the person's background and such. But then sometimes the most useful information are the most actionable ones that people can like, click on that link and then study up on their own and such. So yeah, I think there's just a lot of friction when it comes to knowledge transfer, and that translates to a lot of people opinionating a lot. I'm not saying that opinions are bad. I'm not saying that analysis is bad, but sometimes I think that all this text can be hard to navigate through all this commentary, when what you should be getting is trying to find your own commentary, like make your own commentary, and like finding those links yourself and such. That's just.
I think that's a great answer, and it makes a lot of sense because so I'm like a podcast nut, and like that is one of my preferred mediums to digest information. And if I look at the handful of podcasters that I have listened to over the past decade, the groups of podcasts, my rotation has changed quite dramatically. And if I look at the progression, oftentimes the people that I'm listening to now are like second or third order consequences of them being on other podcasters that I had listened to before. And just the amount of time that I've spent listening to some of these people speak is like insane. It's more than some of my close friends and even family members, which is kind of embarrassing to say. But to your point, that's how it works, right? Is like I listen to a podcaster and I'm like, whoa, they think very differently. They have a huge diversity of interests that I haven't been exposed to, and they speak well. And then that affects my learning trajectory, right? And so that, I think, kind of to what you were saying of like it might be just a link to some different newsletters that you haven't been exposed to, or different books that you hadn't even heard about. Like recently, David Eagleman, who is he's a psychology, I guess like a neuroscientist. I think it's at Baylor University, but he was on like Rick Rubin's podcast, and I found his articulation of how the brain works is from a very different standpoint than traditional neuroscience that I've listened to. And so I realized recently he's got his own podcast, and he's produced like 10s, 20, 30 episodes. And so I've just been digesting those as much as possible. And I don't see that happening. Maybe it's happening at a subsurface that I don't see here in Korea, but it doesn't seem as frequent.
I think it's just I don't want to make a generalization. I don't think this applies to every Korean, obviously, but I think there is this Koreans are very habitual, I think, in the sense they're very set in their habits. It's very hard, and in a way this is a good thing, but in another way it's very hard for them to find other habits, for example, other tracks of information. If they are set in this specific information, that's why hagwons and everything, people might know subconsciously maybe that hagwons are not the most efficient form of like knowledge transfer or anything like that. Like, and there are cheaper, more accessible, like other ways to access that information and that knowledge. But because it's that familiarity and that certainty that you get from like societal like norms and such, that people understand, hey, this is what everyone else is following. I don't think it's like, oh, like I want to be a rebel and like I want to take the path less taken or something like that. I don't think that's. I think there is a safety in a person's mind being that, okay, there's a lot more certainty in the track that I'm following through these hagwons. There's a sense of familiarity and safety in that path that I'm taking because it's been proven throughout decades and such. Though what I'm saying is that familiar track can obviously, there's an obvious limitation being that that becomes your single source of truth and such. And people are not really people don't have the confidence to perhaps explore the for example, the bravery to explore different paths of information and such. And I think that's a definite problem in Korea. I think the fact that people don't feel confident enough to find their own sources of information, like take the reins of their own life to maybe do a little bit more like independent studying, independent research and such, because they are set on this specific path that has been laid out upon them and such. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. On a macro level, on a societal level, you can see that has had a tremendous impact on our math and science. Like the average Korean student is much more studied than the average person abroad, I would say. But there is a consequence to that. There's a consequence to the person's creativity, the person's, for example, ability to find their own sources of information and such. So for sure, I think knowledge silos are like a huge problem that I think can be solved by software, hopefully, or by web. Yeah, through websites and such. Yeah,
I mean, certainly through your own life, like in terms of your the project that you've undertaken and your ability to. It seems like you're comfortable expressing yourself pretty freely, just based on the personal your personal website and what you've put out there, right? Maybe there are still some frictions, and depending on what it is. But I imagine that your background would have informed that, like you spending time in Latin America, you spending time in China, like constantly moving around, not having one social kind of circle that kind of imposes, I guess, some influence on your identity.
I think it could be. I'm gonna have to do like a psychological analysis of this, perhaps. Perhaps it could be the fact that there is a lot of variability in the way I browse and such. For example, in China, I need to learn how to navigate with a VPN, how to or even when I didn't have a VPN, how do I navigate Baidu, or how to for example, search up things in China. And that the browsing experience is very different in, for example, early days of Colombia. It's very different in Korea. It's very different. I had to get used to a lot of different apps and a lot of different, for example, different social mediums or web mediums and such. Perhaps that had a silent impact on the way I browse, the way I, for example, consume information and such. In terms of mentality, I think it because I moved around a lot, it's a double-edged sword in the sense that I've gotten very good at saying goodbye to people. I don't get really attached to people or places and such. Perhaps that's had an impact. I don't know if you make some sort of you do some sort of deconstruction of that sort of behavior. Perhaps that sort of entails the fact that I'm very good at saying goodbye to certain sources of information.
Yeah.
Be that I move really, really quickly through tabs. I move very, very quickly through different blogs or different posts or different papers and such. Maybe it's maybe it's attachment issues. I'm not sure. Maybe it's my ADHD. I don't know. I think there's so many different factors involved, perhaps. But I'm for sure. I do agree that international people with international backgrounds, because they're used to having they're familiar with the local infrastructure as well, the local ecosystem of apps and such, but then they're also familiar with American threads and American Twitter and American algorithms and such. So I think it's just the algorithmic lottery that you have is just really just depends on the background that you have and such, and that really just really informs the type of information that you'll be consuming and such. So I think it's quite complicated for me to put in words, but then for sure I do agree that there's probably an impact. Yeah.
We'll wrap up here soon, but I wanted to ask you two questions. One is, you had mentioned that you are doing exchange program right now in Singapore, but you're here in Seoul, Korea. What are you up to here, and what are you working on?
Okay. I'm cutting class right now. Okay, I shouldn't reveal this. I'll get out anyways. I flew in from Singapore right now to try and push a project called AC.KR, and I'm working as a country lead for Perplexity AI's campus strategy program here. And what I did in the past few weeks was, via different reasons, I was able to convince Perplexity to do something called the AC.KR project. And I don't know if you're aware, but then it's like the .edu of Korea. All Korean students have a school email domain that ends with ac.kr, being yonsei.ac.kr or snu.ac.kr or ihwa.ac.kr. And what I was able to try and convince them was, hey, AI adoption rates in Korea are quite low. Students are still trying to find a way to use AI, but they're just very unfamiliar with it. They also think that it's too pricey for them. What is a way I think there is a way for us for Perplexity to grow as well, but also to offer free AI tools to Korean students as well, for them to be able to become more familiar with AI tools and such. So I was able to convince them to offer 1 year of Perplexity Pro to all Korean college students with an AC.KR email domain. That's almost 2 million Korean students and 200 colleges, and that's that's almost $400 million worth in free software for Korean college students. Through some way, I don't know, maybe I gaslit them or something. I was able to, for example, through a presentation, able to convince them that Korea was a market and an environment that was worth investing in. I genuinely think that Korean college students, if they were able to use AI tools, become familiar with AI tools a lot more. I'm very excited to see what the impact is on education. Perhaps people realize that independent study is much more possible. Perhaps they will like find alternative forms of education, not like, for example, hagwons or anything like that. Perhaps they will be much more inclined to find their own sources of information and such via tools like Perplexity, or perhaps they'll be able to build new stuff with Perplexity's API, or like, you try out Claude, or it doesn't have to only be Perplexity, but it's just for them like a initial step to try and test out what AI tools are. And Korean students are still not very familiar with it, I would say.
Why do you think that is? That kind of surprises me a little bit. I would think that they would have some exposure, be actively using it for like coursework and assignments. It's the degree to which they're using it, like the level of sophistication is not very, very good.
The degree as well. I would say it's also like enterprise adoption has been quite high in Korea, I would say. Like it's being used in a lot of companies for sure. But in terms of the college student, I think a lot of people's experiences with ChatGPT, and I'm not saying that not many people don't use ChatGPT. A lot of people do, but either they don't pay for it, or either their experiences are informed from their early experiences with ChatGPT. For example, when ChatGPT first came out, they were testing it out. It was just like a fad. Like people were thinking of like, oh, let's test it out. Let's see if it works or not. But at that time, perhaps people weren't that excited about ChatGPT. They didn't see how it could like do better than them in terms of like academic research and such. So because they were informed from those early experience with AI and such, maybe perhaps it just hasn't like become a habit. And even if it is, they are used to using like the free tiers of AI tools and such. And there are limitations to the free tier AI tools. That's like the reality of it, in the sense that because of the way you use tokens and such. If you really want to like fully use AI and such, you need to be able to use features like deep research. You need to be able to use, for example, like you need to be able to use it constantly, and like be able to like feed it files and such. So yeah, I think people's experiences with AI are still at its nascent stages in Korea, in Japan, and like in Northeast Asia, just in general, I would say. If you just ask a normal person in the streets, and this is completely understandable because Claude is, it has a very specific niche for software developers. But people here only know ChatGPT, and perhaps they know DeepSeek because they came out in the news.
Right.
They don't know what Grok is. They don't know what Gemini is. They don't know what Claude is. They don't know any of the other AI tools that are out there. So I think Korea is still at that stage where they're experimenting, and I would love to be able to help Korean students, experiment with as many tools as possible. And Perplexity is just one way to do that. Yeah. So I'm excited. I hope it has an impact. I don't know what impact it'll have, but yeah, I just hope people are just excited.
It's very cool and very impressive that you were able to even like land that gig and are back here in Korea working on the effort. In terms of you have a very wide diversity of interests, but in terms of the near-term projects that you're working on, the people that you're most interested in like connecting with and meeting, has that priority been around the AI work that you've been doing? I guess in terms of you had mentioned like, oh yeah, I really enjoy having coffee chats, but are there specific types of people that are most piquing your curiosity these days?
I love talking to debate people. I think you learn so much from like just like listening to great people with like what's it called? Again, it's about the copy and pasting the frameworks that you get from the top debaters and like trying to apply it in your own life and your own arguments and such. I love talking to debate people. I also love talking to people who are like finding different verticals in AI or like in different like in tech and such. I want to explore as much as possible. I also love it's not that active, I'd say. Like people who are in EdTech, I would love to talk to them a lot more. I've honestly just been talking to as many people as possible, irregardless of their expertise and such. I love talking to the design engineering community. I think design engineer is such an exciting new development in the past few months because of tools like V0 and Cursor and like Lovable and all these tools. You're able to create from Figma designs. You're able to go from prototype to full stack app in just a few hours. And that's unbelievable. Like the fact that was impossible just a few years ago, a few months ago. That's empowering a lot of people who have like expertise in design to build out these things through super base integrations and such. I find that so inspiring and so fun. It's so exciting about people being able to create like, yeah. And for example, via 1517, I've met like so many exciting people. Shout out to Phil if he's watching. Phil was one of the first, was the first person I met through the community. And he's in design engineering as well and such. Like there's so many interesting people out there with like sometimes interesting philosophies, I dare say. Yeah. But I do like listening to them and such. And yeah, it's just been really exciting just talking to as many people.
Amazing. So you're going to be back in Singapore soon, right?
Like a week or so. Yes.
And then you'll have one more year at Yonsei before you graduate.
One more semester.
One more semester.
Okay. And then
you'll figure it out from there. I guess you don't know necessarily if you'll be in Seoul long term or if you'll be somewhere else.
If I take on another job, or if I think I need to focus on different projects a little bit more. Maybe I'll take another gap year. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't think it's that big of a problem for me to keep my label of being a student. I think being a student opens up a lot of doors. I think even in the practical sense, being like grants and like scholarships and such. But also just opens up a lot of doors in the sense that people I think are more willing to share advice with you when they know that you're a student and such. Perhaps because I feel less threatening in a way. But yes, I actually love being a student. I love learning as much as possible. So yeah, I think it's just been very exciting. So
amazing. Well, I'm glad that this Perplexity project that you're working on brought you back to Korea so that we could get introduced and have this conversation.
Thank you so much.
And it's encouraging for me to find young people like you. And so I hope we can do another conversation again at some point.
Of course.
All right.
I don't know if I was I don't know if I'm worthy enough for this.
Oh, it was great.
But, thank you so much.
It was excellent. Okay. Thank you, Joonseo.